our Quaker forebears, especially in the 19th century, they established these funds to help aging friends. Because even at that time, some of us were not able to care for ourselves as we got older. So the funds are there. Many of these funds were established in the late 19th century. Some of you may know Anna T. Jeans, the Jeans family, great benefactors to the yearly meeting. And speaking of genes and death, I talked about a little earlier, there is a Genes Memorial Fund for cremation if friends are looking to get monetary assistance with their cremation. Many friends were leaders in cremation in the early 19th century and for most of the 20th century. Now, friends are talking about green burials. So I have a green burial plan, and I hope you all have thought about that. One of the advices you'll find in Faith and Practice going back to the 19th century, early 20th century, is have friends prepared for their demise. Have you made your preparations? And that advice would have been for people in their 40s. Because one never knows. Now we're all living longer, but it is interesting. Friends have always had a very sober look at death and dying. We haven't, Quakerism is very here and now religion. We don't really, I often get asked by non-Quaker relatives when a Quaker is dying and I'm involved in helping assisting. People say, well, what do Quakers think about the afterlife? And I'll say, well, what do you think about the afterlife? I'll say, well, we don't think about it much other than, for hundreds of years, the Quaker approach has been organic. That we're born, we mature, we age, we die. That's that organic model. We don't know what's going to happen next. Hopefully something good will happen next. But I like to quote the microbiologists who say, oh, sure, we're going to live forever. As microbes, probably. Yes, there is an afterlife. But it may not be what we've imagined. So as Quakers, we don't tend to think of the afterlife. We tend to think of this life and our affairs in order. Do we have contingencies? Are there plans? Do we have a power of attorney? Anybody over the age of 60 that hasn't designated a power of attorney to take care, to help them as they age, they should seriously think about that. And, I talked about long-term care, and many of us will think of maybe going to a long-term care community. Do we have long-term care insurance? Just something to think about. There is something called long-term care insurance. If you're shopping for it, Mutual of Omaha is a good option. I'm not getting no self-interest there, but I do have their plan. But as Quakers, thinking soberly about what's going to happen to us as we age, and I shared in the meeting this morning. When I was a young friend, I did a workshop with Rachel, and of course at that time I never thought I was going to be as old as she was. That'll never happen. But of course, here we are. So the hard part for many friends is looking at what their need is and admitting to themselves, okay, I need some assistance. Let me call George. Now there's a new person as well at the yearly meeting who is doing the type of work that I was doing. Her name is Sheila Sorkin. I'm also helping her, and I continue to work with the yearly meeting as a contractor. So the other big fund at yearly meeting is called the Greenleaf Fund. Now it's named after, of course, Quaker poet John Greenleaf Whittier, and the Greenleaf was a personal care home in Moorestown in, I guess it was 06. The board of the Greenleaf is a personal care home, Quaker boarding home. And another interesting aside is that many of the Quaker boarding homes, assisted living homes, were for women in the early days, in the early wave of feminism, that decided to work. So in the late 19th century, if you decided to work, you were not going to get married. That was just the way it is. So Susan B. Anthony, Alice Paul lived at the Greenleaf. She lived to be over 100. Alice Paul, suffragette, never married. And there is a story about Alice Paul living at when she turned 100. This is a bit apocryphal, but when she turned 100, Richard Nixon called her on the phone. In those days, to be 100 was quite a thing. And he was a Quaker and she was a Quaker. And Nixon called her and they said, "Oh, Alice, the president's on the phone. He wants to wish you a happy birthday." And she said, "Tell him I'm busy." True to the end. She didn't like it. But anyway, so the Greenleaf Fund, the board decided that to comply with the New Jersey regulations for assisted living was going to be too onerous, and so they sold the building and they took care of the people that were living there, and they put the money in an endowment, and the endowment is for all Friends in the yearly meeting, with a special emphasis on a priority on Friends in Haddonfield Quarter, then South Jersey, then the rest of the yearly meeting. So, so you all have a priority standing as South Jersey Friends. But the difference with the Greenleaf is that the Greenleaf can support you if you're living in long-term care. So the other funds, as I mentioned, the Aging Granting Group, those funds are for people primarily living in their own homes. And they're designed to keep Friends living in their homes for as long as possible. And I'm a social worker, and so I work with Friends about, we talk a lot about aging in place. And if you're interested in the topic of aging, there is a Quaker website that I helped to create called Quaker Aging Resources, all one word, .org. QuakerAgingResources.org. And if you need any details about any of the things I'm saying, Joan can give you my contact information, give you my email, my phone number. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. But Quaker Aging Resources is a very interesting site. We try to make it like a Quaker spiritual journey. It starts with queries, and there are categories, and there's also over 30 informational pamphlets that you can download on aspects of aging, and it's a very good site, and people from all over the world go to the site as well. So the Greenleaf Granting Group, as I mentioned, they took the money from the sale of the Greenleaf and invested it with Friends Fiduciary, and now it's over $12 million a year. So they have approximately $450,000 a year that they distribute to Friends in the yearly meeting that have a need. There's an application process, of course, and there's a review process, but they meet twice a year to review applications. The next deadline will be April 30th, May 1st for review in June. And they've given out now probably close to $3 million since they started. And as I mentioned, some of that money can go to individuals living in, say, Friends Village or Penswood Village, any of the Quaker or Medford Lees, any of the Quaker long-term care communities. There is one little stickler there because the granting group, that money is not intended to subsidize the long-term care community itself. It's there to help individuals. So the individual must make application. The facilities cannot make application. Now there are some grants that are available to facilities, but I won't go into that today because most of the facilities know what they are, and they can be readily accessed. Information about them can be readily accessed. So those are your two big groups of funds that can support aging. Now there is another fund called the John Martin Fund. And John Martin Fund, although available to all members of the yearly meeting, is not overseen by the yearly meeting. It is overseen by Arch Street Friends Meeting. to talk a little ancient history, you know, at one point there were 2 yearly meetings, and an Orthodox and a liberal, and they came together in 1955. And when they came together, Arch Street being the bastion of orthodoxy for Quakers in Philadelphia, it decided to hold on to that money, which is fine, but it's available to anyone. So there is an application process for that, and it's separate from the yearly meeting website. John Martin Trust Fund has its own website. You need to go there. Again, if you needed help with that, I'd be glad to help you. But you need to go to their website. They will review the application, and then they will make a grant if they so see fit. Now, the other part of this I sort of mentioned is you need to express what your need is. You know, you need to say, I need so much money. I need new hearing aids. I need help with personal care in my home setting. And that's often hard to do, to figure out what are my needs. So the yearly meeting staff and the granting staff and care and aging staff, we're here to help sort through that. And, you know, it's oftentimes to say I have a need and I need assistance from my faith community, that can be very difficult for people. You know, again, because of just the experience of aging. We all want to be, you know, there's a, you know, if you've ever interacted with a 3-year-old, there is a very strong drive towards autonomy. I can do it myself, you know, they want to do it. And we all have this drive towards autonomy. But when do we make the shift to say, okay, I need help. I need to become more dependent on people in my community to help me get along. And that's a spiritual issue as well. That's not just an issue of having your kids tell you. And do you have a question?
Yeah, the funds you're talking about, they're means tested based on income? Do people have to like sell their home or declare?
Well, that's a great question. I was just heading that way.
Sorry.
No, that's good. No, perfect. There is a means test of short, and what that means is that what your means are, your wherewithal, what your worth is, will be looked at when you make application. Now, everybody needs to live in a house, so everybody needs to drive a car. The one thing that the Greenleaf is looking at, they use a calculation of 350 to 400% above the poverty line. And for an individual, that's about $35,000, $36,000 a year. For a couple, that's 60-some a year. And that would be the baseline where you would be eligible. If you were above that, if you had a retirement income of, say, $60,000, $70,000, the committee would consider your application, but they would want to know where your money's going. So the yearly meeting doesn't want to subsidize a legacy. So sometimes people will say, well, I'm saving my, I have all these assets, but I'm saving them for my children. Well, the yearly meeting, the committee's going to say, okay, you can do that, but you have to start to spend down some of it. You can't. They probably want to say all of it. But Friends, most committees, and both committees, if you have anywhere from $15,000 to $50,000 in assets, that's usually the cushion that you can work with. So if you have what's called modest means, which is now anywhere from 30 to 40, and you have assets that are under 50,000, exclusive of your house and your home and all that.
What is the current poverty line?
The poverty line now is about $12,600. Yeah, $12,600. Yeah, it's pretty. So the poverty level in America is a hot button political issue. Nobody wants to touch it. It was established in the 70s. and that's where it's staying because nobody. So what most agencies do, most public welfare agencies do is they multiply it. So we say 400% above the poverty. So 400 times 12 is approximately where we'll. Now the other thing with Quaker funds is that we're kind of like family. Like we all know each other. And so it's a cross between a family foundation and a grant-making group, right, John? We the people that come, after a while at yearly meeting, we all get to know each other. So there's a lot of individuality, is what I'm sure. There's a lot of, a lot of special cases, if you will, or exceptions, or we know people have legacies, people have family history, and so there's a lot of individuality when considering. So even though there are these guidelines, and I have some of them up on the computer, don't let the guideline dissuade you from applying, because we're gonna look at each application on its merit and who you are and your relationship to yearly meeting, and all of that is going to be factored in. Now, and an example of that is many of the long-term care communities in our area, the Quaker long-term care communities, of course, we don't have ministers or pastors. So how does the pastoral care function get fulfilled when people die? People who go there, who have the pastoral care gift of that ministry, and then they pass on. How does it continue? How does Quaker pastoral care and spiritual care continue in a long-term care community that doesn't hire ministers? That's a big issue for us at yearly meeting and in the communities, because other places have a chaplain. So Pennswood Village, for example, at Pennswood Village, the Presbyterians hired a part-time Presbyterian chaplain. They got together as a group living in a Quaker facility and said, let's bring in a chaplain once a week to talk to us and give us some spiritual comfort. But as Friends, we don't do that. So sometimes if someone's going into a long-term care community, they've led a life of service, they have a gift of pastoral care, the committee will consider that as weighing in their favor to bring them into the community. And also the communities themselves, especially the Kendall communities, will say, okay, this person's going to bring that gift and that quality to the community. Let's give them a discount. Let's cut them a break in some way on either the entry fee or on their monthly fee. So that is a big dilemma for the Quakers. How do you keep our pastoral care? Because when Quaker long-term care communities started, they didn't. So I go out to Quaker long-term care communities, and I say to people, how many people are here because they're Quaker and they want to keep the community connection that's so essential to their spirituality alive? And one or two people raise their hand. And then I say, how many people are here because they don't want to be a burden to their children? And everybody's hand goes up. So most people that are looking at long-term care now are looking at it as not being a burden. But the original Quaker impulse was to keep the community alive, to keep the spirit alive, to live in community. Because for Quakers, God is there, but God is also here. God's between us. God is among us. And so being among your friends and your Quaker friends especially is important to your spirituality. And of course, as one ages, spirituality becomes a very important issue. And not because, as one of my nieces said, we're cramming for finals. Because these are issues that we think about. What does happen next? Interesting. So, any other questions about? Yes.
Since you have one, can you explain a little bit about the green burial?
Well, interestingly, Quakers have been doing green burials forever. So a green burial would be, there would be no embalming at all of the body. The body would be put in a plain casket, plain pine box is what I've purchased. So there'll be no embalming, no waking of viewing, that kind of a thing. Except maybe in the meeting house, some meetings, Schuylkill meeting, they have a tradition where they'll get the body in a box and bring it into the meeting house for a day, and people will come, and they use hot ice to keep the body sort of fresh for a while, and then they bury the body. And there's no vaulting of the burial ground. So the vaulting is, you may have seen trucks with these big concrete vaults on them. Well, they dig a hole and put that in the ground, then they put the casket in the vault and to preserve it forever. And so that's going to be there for a long, long time. But the green burial would be that, as in the least disruptive way to get the body back into the earth where it came from. So,
Do they let you do it anywhere?
what's that?
Do they let you do that anywhere?
Well, that's the thing. Funeral directors do not let you do. Funeral directors have a very strong tie to state legislatures, and they also have a vested interest in doing it the more expensive way. The American way of death, it's called. So you can, people spend $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 to die. And they'll sell you a very nice $30,000 package to die. But the green burial would be, again, simplicity would be our watchword as Quakers. So you can go to your funeral director and say, okay, I want a simple, I want your basic. Don't need the Brazilian mahogany casket. That would be a beginning. And there are other alternatives to being buried in the ground. You can be buried as a tree. You can be, there are all sorts of green ways to dispose of one's body.
What do you mean buried as a tree?
Yeah, there's an outfit. You can find them online. I forget their name, but they'll sort of compost your body, and then they'll use it as fertilizer for planting a tree. And there are also these new parks where you can walk. It's like a park setting. Actually, that's where my body will go, into like a park, a little grove of trees. And there's a bench and a little granite wall with nameplates on the. And if you go to England and you go to Quaker burial grounds in England, you will see that it's just a green field with a wall, a stone wall, and the stone wall will have the names of the people that are deceased. And so no headstone, none of that. And of course, if you go to Nantucket Island and go to the Quaker burial ground there are no headstones at all. So Quakers really didn't start using headstones until about 100 years after the movement started. And so...
I'm from Greenleaf Friends Meeting, and we've spent quite a bit of time over the last few years rewriting our guidelines for our burial grounds. And we've forbidden embalming, and we encourage green burials, and we even allow somebody in a cardboard box and bury them themselves if you want.
Yeah.
Our Orthodox burying ground has some headstones, but a lot of them there's no headstone. We just have a map, and there are people who get buried on top of other people.
Yeah. It depends on how long it's been, and then you can always. Yeah, embalming really started during the Civil War, when bodies had to be transported, when parents would want their son's body buried in the local cemetery or burial ground. And about a third of Quaker men, a third to half of the Quaker men in the North during the Civil War volunteered to fight for the Union. So many of those practices, the Civil War in terms of Quakerism was a huge watershed because the men came back, they married women who weren't Quakers, and they still wanted to be a member of the meeting. So there was a big adjustment. But that's when the embalming started for transport. And then it became, and then the funeral directors it became de rigueur. But there are health rules regarding how the body should be disposed of. But as Quakers, we can kind of claim that we were doing this before those rules existed. And there's another rule about taking bodies over state lines. You cannot, you have to get special permits to transport bodies over state lines. But anyway, that's, yeah.
There's a lot of information here.
Yes.
I used to talk to people in the yearly meeting. I had a question, I had an issue, and I didn't know who to call. Okay, and I say, well, who'd you call? I didn't call anybody. Call somebody. And all this. So if someone has a question and they don't remember the web page or they don't remember your name, you ought to call someone. They will get directed to the right telephone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so, just the green burial discussion over there. So
I'm sorry.
that's all right. No,
I asked a question.
yeah, I know.
Maybe
I
others
figured you
would
guys
like
talked
to know
about
the
it. But
answer.
the website, QuakerAgingResources.org, there's a pamphlet on green burial that I've written. You can find it on there.
My question to the Greenwich friend was whether people from Friends outside Greenwich were able to be buried in their Orthodox plain cemetery, and she said she believes so.
Oh, there's
That one I know for
so the
sure.
Orthodox cemetery has no headstones?
Yes.
It has a few, but not very many. There are some. And we've made some very strict guidelines about size and, that sort of thing. But we do, for people who are not Friends, we do sell a plot there. It's not particularly expensive compared to most places. But for Friends, especially Friends that have been part of our community at one time, we've given them plots, and just because they're part of us.
Right. Yeah. Most Quaker meetings, as a benefit of membership, you get a plot, and you might want to put money aside for the grave digger for tips for the grave digger and that kind of thing. But yeah, most burial grounds are.
Within our meeting, everybody can be buried for free.
Oh.
But in the Orthodox, I'm not sure what we would charge, but we do charge non-Friends who are Quaker-like, a fairly small fee for a plot.
Little Orthodox Quakers.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Orthodox Quakers in our yearly meeting, they had that one split between Hicksite, liberal, and Orthodox, and there was no schisms after that because the Orthodox Quakers refused to open their mail. If they got an epistle from Ohio yearly meeting, they just put it aside. They never opened it, and it's a true thing. They sort of went into their own little shell, and they're very much like conservative Friends in a way, in that sense, Orthodox. But anyway,
I was just curious how cremation ranks on the scale of, eco-friendly burial.
well, cremation used to be very eco-friendly until about 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, when people started being appalled at finding bones in their remains, and so there were so the states regulated a higher BTU heat for, and now it's just all dust. So once they started doing that, it no longer became environmentally friendly thing to do. But at one point it was, if you didn't mind, the way the cremains were. But there were a few scandals because, they just used to go in and shovel the cremains and put them in the urn, and people got concerned about whether it was really their persons or theirs. So yeah, that became. But some people do want to do that still, and it does. You have the ashes, and people still do things where they go to a favorite site and distribute the ashes and that sort of thing.
What about donating your body to science?
Yeah, you can still do that. You should check with the hospital system you leave your body to, whether there'll be expenses involved or not. And then what happens after they finish using the body? Where does it go? Because usually it will come back to the family, and the family has to figure out what to do with it. So donating your body to science is more complicated than you would think.
Well, my mother-in-law did it, and it was so easy because she died, they came, took her body, that was it.
Okay.
We had no concerns, no worries. 2 years later, they contacted us, said, we have her ashes if you want them. So we got the ashes back and, but the body's gone, so, I don't care what happens to the ashes.
Yeah, that's still away.
On the long-term care facilities that have in the past been, what you call it, oversight by Quakers, like Measured Leaves and Capestown, Friends Home. We're hearing stories that those are no longer overseen by Quakers. Is that true?
No, not, well, I mean, I think Friends Village Woodstown is in the process of changing ownership, but the others, second call in a row, must be my wife. Well, the business model for CCRCs is a challenging one because, as I mentioned, people are living longer. And there's what we've seen in long-term care is what I would call like corporatization. So even, I mentioned the Greenleaf. A lot of the Quaker boarding homes were mom and pop operations. The Harcum, which was in Delaware County, I was a member of Radnor meeting. We used to have volunteers. We used to volunteer from my meeting and go there and set up Christmas decorations, and the meeting was involved in it. But the regulations just forbid that after a while, and it became too onerous. And so the mom and pop model of the Quaker boarding home, it went, and then the regulations came in when the assisted living industry started, when all the Sunrises and all the other places started popping up. They were unregulated for many years, and the states sort of were a little bit behind, and they used personal care home regs to start to retroactively regulate them, and it just became too much of a burden. So there's been a corporatization, and with that comes expense. And so, it's hard. I mean, Kendall Corporation, which is Quaker, which started, and most of the homes, even Greenleaf, started from a grant made by Yearly Meeting. The Committee on Aging made most of the grants years ago. But Kendall Corporation has survived, and they're one of the big players. They have Kendall Corporations all over America now. I mean, Kendall Corporation facilities all over America. But the small ones, they struggle. If you're independent, many people will contact me and say, why don't the Quakers step in and do X, Y, and Z with this long-term care facility that seems like it's going under? And we're not like the Presbyterians or and we don't have a hierarchy where there's a huge endowment and we're do it yourself.
There's still Friends Home in Kennet that operates sort of like the boarding home. They do have a memory facility that's very small and not Medicaid or Medicare funded.
Friends Home in Canada, I was just mentioning it to someone yesterday. They have refused, or they have refused to go the third-party route, and they're just their own thing. They have a lovely community of Quakers in Kennet that can come and help. Friends Home Kennet, but they struggle.
Yeah, I served on the board. So
they struggle, but they're true to the original vision.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, they are. I mean, they have a lovely newsletter, and people are involved from the community and the meeting, are involved in the home. But that has pretty much disappeared for the rest of them. I mean, the Hickman in Westchester, just north, is now pretty well established. They have, and they're partnering with the Barclay, and the Barclay is Kendall Corporation now. Shangle Hall up in Newtown is Kendall Corporation as well. So they've had to, you know, in terms of their business function, they've had to partner with a corporate entity in order to survive the market. Because, and I was a personal care administrator for 20 years before I started doing this work. And if you have overhead and your census, meaning people living in your facility, goes below 85% capacity, you start losing money. And I no longer did that work because I wanted to sleep at night. I was like, think of my numbers all the time. I'm going down to 82%. What am I going to do? So yeah, it's very stressful work, and the people that do that work, I applaud them because it's very, very hard. And I know, Joan, you serve on the board, and Jack and Chris. Yeah, it's a labor of love. It is, and and it's constantly changing.
How do you spell this Jeans Fund?
The what?
The Jeans Fund?
Jeans? Oh, it's Jeans. The Jeans. Yeah.
Could you give a little history of that, because that's an interesting,
Well, the Jeans family.
back in Philadelphia in the 1800s, right?
1800s, yeah. The Jeans family in the 1800s. They were involved in building the railroads, and they had 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys, none of whom ever married, and they all became philanthropists. So that's what when we say Anna T. Jeans, it's Anna T. Jeans, and there are other Jeans as well that are deaf. But in Philadelphia, there's Jeans Hospital. They built a hospital on the grounds of Cheltenham Meeting. Cheltenham Meeting now is used as a chapel for the hospital, but they were bought out by the Temple Hospital System, and so they're now part of Temple University. You can still go there as a Quaker and throw your way around and say, "Hey, but wait a minute, I'm a Quaker. Where's the old meeting house?" They will let you use the meeting house. Yeah, Abington, we use it sometimes.
But just the fact that the whole family, 4 children and the parents, just turned over everything in their estates to the Quakers. And they weren't Quaker, were they?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, they were.
Oh, they
okay,
were.
I heard somewhere along the line, I thought they
Yeah.
weren't Quakers.
No, in Friends Center at 15th and Cherry, of course, there's the meeting house there at Race Street, but Friends Center, where the offices are, apparently Anna T. Jeans was driving in her carriage, and she passed all the row houses there, and she said, "Wouldn't it be great to have like a center of Quaker, offices?" And she told her person, "Okay, buy all these row homes, knock them down, and build something." And she gave the land to the Young Friends Association. So, and then the Young Friends Association then sold the land to Friends Center Corporation. But if you go to Friends Center, there we do. I made sure they preserved the plaque that said that the money was from Anna T. Jeans. But she was a great benefactor. Yeah. And there are all kinds of funds that she endowed. And many of the personal care boarding homes, well, in Newtown, if you go to Newtown, PA, as soon as you walk in, there's a large picture of Anna T. Jeans. She was a remarkable woman. Yeah.
So obviously you were with PYM, and then there are a few other yearly meetings. There's one there's Brit. I forget all of them, but is there like are there different rules for the different yearly meetings? Do you guys communicate, or? You know what I mean?
Yeah, we do communicate and collaborate. And actually, when you go to Quaker Aging resources, .org, you'll see it was a collaboration between New York Yearly Meeting and Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. And New York Yearly Meeting had a personal care home in McCutcheon, called the McCutcheon, and they sold it as well. and they created Friends Foundation for the Aging. And so Friends Foundation for the Aging makes grants to local groups, to local Quaker groups and others with a concern for aging. So that's another resource, yeah. Yeah, the McCutcheon was in McCutcheon, New Jersey, which is just, I guess that's probably as far south for New York Yearly Meeting. New York Yearly Meeting, so Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, Princeton, I guess, is the northernmost of ours, and then New York Yearly Meeting starts there in North Jersey, more or less. A lot of information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, who knew it was so complicated? Now, the one last thing I want to say is that who knew dying was so complicated? Who knew growing old was so complicated? I guess we all knew. But the CCRCs that we talked about, since 2010, they have adopted a more flexible approach. So what used to be called the A contract, where you go in independent and then you stay through until hospice. That was called the A contract. There's more flexibility now. You can live independently, and then if you wanted to go somewhere else, you could go somewhere else. They're more flexible about the down payment, because most people will sell their homes as a down payment to get in. And you can go into assisted living. Medford Lease has very affordable. Medford Lease, when the economy downturned in 2010, rather than going upscale, they decided to save some units for friends of modest means. So you can live there. Kendall did the same thing at Longwood. They built Crosslands, which is cottages, but Longwood still is what you would call apartment living or congregate living. So there's more flexibility, and if you were thinking of living in a community, the best thing to do is to go and talk to people and have lunch and just get to know what the atmosphere is like. And all these communities need Quakers as well. So, all right, how are we doing? More?
Any questions?
Any more questions?
Comments?
Questions, comments?
If not, George, it's been an overload of information.
I guess that wasn't decaf coffee I had.
No.
Thank you all.
Thank you.